that gospel, I guess a guy named Luke, but he had no concept of weathermen of the television era, because they look and they see a cloud and they say it's going to rain and the sun's out. I remember one time when I was living in Washington, D.C., a radio announcer came on and he said, "We have a 10% chance of snow today." And there was this long pause, and he said, "I just looked out the window and it's 10%ing all over us." So anyway, we do tend to think of the world around us. We tend to think of, if it's getting real dark and cloudy, that there's probably going to be rain or some kind of a storm. Or when it's cold and those wonderful clouds come up that we think are snow clouds, and 9 times out of 10 it snows. Or when all of a sudden there's a southern breeze that comes up and it's hot. That's like this summer. Every time it comes from the south, it's hot. If it comes in from the west, it's moderately hot. If it comes from the east, it's still hot. Summer is a hot time. So, Jesus says, "You hypocrites, you know how to interpret the weather, but why do you not know how to interpret the present time?" That's a good question. How do we interpret the time that we live in? How do we interpret who we are and where we are and why we are? How do we interpret that in light of the gospel of our Lord? Well, supposedly we follow in the footsteps of Jesus. And that's one of the ways that we begin to interpret the world around us. You know, Sunday mornings are my best time for taking the dog for a walk. Partly because it's so quiet and peaceful, and there's no traffic in Eagle on Sunday mornings. Everybody's blown out by the market and they stay home, or they go to church on the other side of town. So it's quiet, and you can hear the doves singing, and you can hear other birds singing, and you can hear the wind blowing through the trees, and you can hear all kinds of wonderful sounds, and you can see all kinds of wonderful sights. And this morning we were walking, and it was a perfect morning for a walk. And then I looked over on the other side of the street, and here is a woman. I heard her talking. And here's a woman taking a walk on a Sunday morning, talking on her phone. And then I saw somebody playing a game on their phone. And I wondered after having read this gospel and thought about it all week, how come they are able to miss the wonders of God in the world around us? The wonders of our Lord that are out there every day, every hour, every minute. And how can we miss those without even thinking about it? Oh, you know, somebody asked me the other day, wouldn't you like to go back to the age when you were growing up? Well, I thought about that. I enjoyed growing up in a small town in northwestern Pennsylvania. I enjoyed that. I had a good life. I had fun. And it was enjoyable growing up in a small town. Do you think I would go back there? Not on your life. We had a phone. It took 1.5 years to get a phone installed in the house that we built out in the country. And once it was installed, it was 7 other people on the same line. So you had to wait your turn to talk on the phone. Cars. used gasoline like crazy. And one of the things that I remember so vividly, the first car I had, if you could get 5,000 to 10,000 miles out of tires, you were lucky. And then you had to go buy new tires. And there's all these things that, you know, I don't want to go back to those days. I like what we have today. But I also like even more the commandments that our Lord gives us, and the way, the path that he shows us to walk in the world that God has given us to take care of. And we still manage to mess it up periodically. You know, I just was reading an article this week that the state of Idaho has dropped in their sustainability for life from here to here because of various and sundry things, among which is pollution, air pollution, water pollution, all those kinds of things. I don't like that. But I do like the fact that you and I have the tools, you and I have the gifts that God gives us to change our world that we live in if we don't like it. If we don't like what's going on, God gives us the path to follow. Now, it sounds like that might be an easy thing. But if you read into this gospel, or maybe it was the other gospel, I don't know. Anyway, houses divided against self, it's this gospel. Houses divided, people arguing with one another, people fighting amongst families and friends and communities. And somehow, if we can overcome that kind of tension that we have in our world, oftentimes I think, oh, I wish I had done more to promote better relationships around the world. And then I remember, I don't live around the world. I live in Idaho. And where better to begin to mend relationships than within the community where I live, with the family. Fortunately, our family gets along pretty well. We don't have a lot of fighting. We don't have a lot of stuff going on. We enjoy each other's company. But there are times when I love my children dearly, but I don't like them. I just don't like what they do sometimes and what they do to themselves. My oldest son is a fireman. He works 48 hours on and then 4 days off. And he's all of a sudden decided they're going to remodel their house, so he started working overtime. So he's working like 4 days every week and taking maybe 3 days off during that week. And I keep reminding him, take care of yourself, or you can't redo what you want to do to your house. So, you know, we have those kinds of disagreements, but God gives us the tools, the pathway, everything that we need to make our lives go in conjunction with God's life. You know how to interpret the appearance of the earth. How come we don't know how to interpret the present time that we live in? And how come we can't bring peace into our lives and into our world? How come we can't do that if we truly believe in Jesus Christ as the Son of God, who gives us the tools and gives us the way? Jesus said, Thomas, I think it was, or one of the apostles said, you know, what is this way that you talk about? And Jesus simply says, I am the way, I am truth, I am life. I am the way, I am truth, I am life. It can be that simple if we're willing to do that. Now, I have to be honest with you, it's not easy. It's not an easy path to follow because there is a lot of tension around, and we have to learn how to live within that tension, but live with the love and the peace that God gives us through Jesus Christ. And that's not an easy thing. And sometimes it means confronting other people. Sometimes it means just loving the unlovable. Sometimes it means a smile or a positive statement instead of jumping on the bandwagon and criticizing or fighting with something. And that's not always easy. As one who has very strong opinions, it's not always easy to follow the path that Jesus offers us. But we have to keep working at it. Unfortunately, we have a God who forgives and forgives and forgives and forgives. We have a God that loves us so much that God will forgive us and show us how to move beyond what it is we're struggling with, if we just simply let that be. I would use that example of the gospel for the morning. I'm one who hates to make a mistake in liturgy. I just don't like to make a mistake. But as soon as I started reading that gospel, I said, that's not what I'm preaching on today. That's not the right gospel. Who put the ribbons there? How did that happen? You know, and there was a time when I would have interrupted in the middle of it and said, oh, I made a mistake. Let's go back to the right gospel. But I figured, what the heck? This is a good gospel too. Let's let people hear that. And then we'll go to the second gospel and read that. So you get John and Luke in one morning. What a treat. Anyway, I pick up things off of the internet periodically. And there's a man who is a kind of a rebel pastor in one of the evangelical churches named John Pavlovitz, I think. That's how you pronounce his name. And he sends these things out every once in a while. And he starts off by saying, in this particular one, he says, I'm not an angry person. I'm just a good and loving person who really gets pissed off at the lack of goodness and love I see in the place I call home. I'm an otherwise joyful human being who finds it difficult to fathom how hard some people work to damage other human beings. And this has tempered my joy greatly. I like those kinds of words that pop up, and I think that sometimes those kinds of words are the words that God throws in front of me to remind me of things. I'm not an angry person. I am one who likes and loves people and loves the world I live in. But sometimes I just get fed up with it. And that's when I have to turn and say, God, what do you want me to do? Unfortunately, God doesn't speak in our ears. God speaks in our hearts. And that's where I have to keep learning and relearning and over again, listening for that God and the Spirit that lives in my heart. And I encourage all of us to keep doing that over and over and over again. I could keep going talking about how good God is and what a wonderful teacher Jesus is and all that kind of stuff. But it is true. And all we need to do is give God a chance. And God will be there all the time. And the really good news is, even if we don't give God a chance, God's there. So we might as well give up, wait in line for the party phone, and let God work through us in God's world. Amen.
Amen.